Winter squash are one of my very favorite things. You guys have heard me talk about them before. I love to grow them, to eat them. They're fantastic. One of the things that I love most about them is that they pretty much store themselves for the most part. During the fall, when everything is really busy, I do not have one more thing that I have to deal with by getting these processed right away, either into the freezer or the canner or fermented or what have you. These just sit on the shelf. However, eventually, when your storage conditions are not the best, which mine haven't been, eventually you end up with some of this situation, which is what we're dealing with today. I've got 3 big winter squash that have started to grow spots, and they need to now be processed. It has been about 3.5 months since I harvested them, so that is still a good long stretch that I haven't had to deal with them. And I do have quite a few that are still in pristine condition that are storing really beautiful on the shelf. I have moved most of mine out of my kitchen. They used to be up here on my kitchen cupboards, but it's like 75, 80 degrees up there. I checked. That is not the ideal long-term storage temperature range for squash. So since I have my master bathroom as a storage unit, and that is where I'm currently curing my sausages and cheeses and things, I went ahead and moved the rest of my winter squash up there. So hopefully they will continue to store pretty well for me in their new, more optimal temperature range. However, this gives us a great opportunity to talk about some preserving methods and some recipes for winter squash. I am going to share with you a Rebel canning recipe today, as well as an approved canning recipe, also freezing, and then there will be a blog post that I will put up here and in the description that will have a compilation of all of my favorite pumpkin-y, winter squashy recipes that you can make and enjoy with your winter squash harvest. One of my favorites that I'm excited to type up and show you guys is my master muffin mix. I have been tweaking this recipe for, I want to say like 6 years now. I have been tweaking this recipe. When I switched to using whole wheat flour, I tweaked it. When I switched to fresh milled grains, I tweaked it a little bit more. It has been a loving work in progress for years. It's my family's very favorite. I'm so excited to type this up and share it with you guys. If you are doing a lot of preservation, this is a really fun book. I don't 100% agree with everything in here because I do a lot of Rebel canning myself. So like this book says that it's not safe to can pumpkin the way that I am going to today. But this book also has some really fun recipes and inspiration, and it's organized by food type. So you can flip to a section for tomatoes and it tells you everything that you might want to know about preserving tomatoes or winter squash. This is actually where I got my fermented winter squash chutney idea from that I did a video on. It came out of this book, and that was a really fun recipe. So this is a fun read. I'll link it in the description, and you could probably find it from your local library too. I personally use a few different methods to preserve my winter squash. I can them, and I made this really delicious canned pumpkin butter recently, which I will share with you. Also, freezing the pumpkin either in cubes that are blanched or in a puree. This is super easy if you have a freezer space. And I have also fermented winter squash, and that is really fun and different. I don't know that I would do a lot of winter squash in ferments, but it's a fun novelty thing to have once in a while. First thing we're gonna do is just remove all of the yucky spots and put them straight in the compost bin. After that, I like to cut my squash in half and remove the seeds. I either save them for replanting or I go ahead and add them to the compost as well to feed them to the chickens and the ducks. Look at all of those seeds. That is so many viable, beautiful winter squash seeds that I can share with my community and replant next year. I pop these whole halves into the oven at about 375 for 45 minutes to an hour, just until they are tender. And then I let them cool down so that I don't burn my fingers off. Once they're cool, the skin falls off pretty easy. It becomes much less daunting to remove the skin from the flesh of the squash. It also loses a bit of moisture, which is great. You get a thicker, richer puree. I like to use my immersion blender here. It is one of the handiest kitchen tools that I own. Hands down, love this. But if you do not have one and you have a stand blender or a Vitamix or something else, go ahead and use that. And then once it's blended, put it back into your soup pot, because we are going to bring this to a quick boil so that it is nice and hot and somewhat sterile going into the canner. So once I've got this up to a boil, I fill warm, clean jars up to an inch of headspace. Put the lids on. However, if you're using reusable lids or metal lids, follow the directions for the lids, 1 inch of headspace. And for quart jars, I do 75 minutes at 15 pounds of pressure. For pints, I do 55 minutes at 15 pounds of pressure. Let them sit and cool down overnight, and then remove the rings, wipe them down if they need a quick wipe, label them, and pop them into the pantry. I have a bit of siphoning on these jars, which is just so annoying. I hate siphoning, but it happens to the best of us. It's really not a big deal overall as long as you haven't lost more than half of the liquid out of your canned goods. There are lots of things that you can do to help prevent siphoning, and I'll put a link to an article about that in the description, but sometimes it just happens. Now, if I want to take my pumpkin puree and go ahead and turn it into a spiced, delicious, sweet treat, pumpkin butter, all I do is follow the same exact steps, except for right at the end, before I boil it, I go ahead and I add in sweetener. So honey, sugar, maple syrup, whatever kind of sweetener I want to use at that moment. Add that to taste, and I add pumpkin pie spices to taste, a little bit of lemon juice or apple cider vinegar, and then I blend that all together, bring that up to a boil, and the same exact thing. Now, again, this is not an FDA approved recipe. They do not suggest that you can pumpkin puree at all. Their logic is that your home canner cannot sufficiently heat all the way through to the middle of that puree. I do find that a little hokey personally. And also, like, your homemade puree is not gonna be as thick as the stuff that you get in the shops in a can. It just isn't. If you cook it down a ton, you can get it pretty thick, but then your blender's not gonna be able to handle blending it probably. So it's kind of a catch-22. I am personally not worried about it. at all. Back in the 70s, ball canning actually recommended pressure canning squash puree. So they have changed their tune since then, but I still do it this way and I feel safe about it. But again, you are in charge of what you eat. So if you don't feel safe with it, don't do it. Stick with using the freezer, or what the ball books do approve now is going with a cubed squash approach. So you can take your raw squash, skin it, peel it, cube it up, pop it in a pot, cover it with water, and blanch it for 2 minutes. And then you hot pack your mason jars, again, inch of headspace. So you pack it loosely with those blanched cubes and you cover it with the liquid from that pot. And you do about the same times. Now that you've got your squash preserved, you can enjoy it in whatever way you like. I love adding pumpkin puree to my master muffin mix recipe. I also love doing like a pumpkin curry soup or a French pumpkin soup. I've got a couple pumpkin soup recipes that I really love that are gonna be on that blog post with all of my favorite pumpkin recipes compiled for your perusal and enjoyment. Thank you guys for joining me today. I'd love to hear what you think about FDA regulations on canning, or just rebel canning, the whole concept, and food preservation safety. Let me know what you think in the comments. And then also, if you liked this video, if you found value in it, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and share it with a pumpkin loving friend. All right, I think that's it for today. I will see you guys next time.